So how does a classical on-prem system looks like in the moment when you're starting the project? The first thing that you usually start to do, you start to manage the user, define infrastructure, request the infrastructure, and so on. If you're playing with big companies or with bigger providers of infrastructure and services, it's something normal to wait until a specific VM is already prepared for you. You might wait 1 week, 1 month, even 3 or 6 months. In a few years ago, I think 6 years ago, I was involved in a project where we waited around 8 or 9 months for a specific computer to be ready. And why? Because they would produce that kind of computers only on special only on special requests. It was a supercomputer, around 1 million euros. That was the value of the computer, and only of a special request they would create. So the main idea is that the latency at the beginning of the project is very, very slow. On one part, this is bad, but also on the other part, it gives you enough time to be able to think about all the things that you need to handle. The setup of the team, the setup of the infrastructure, the setup of the source control, and so on. Versus when you're working with a cloud provider like Azure, things change. The hardest thing that you have to do is to request access or to have a subscription. This might take a few hours, a few days, or if you're a big organization where nobody wants to put their credit card information, you might wait 2 or 3 weeks. But in the end, you will be able to manage this. And once you have this subscription and you have the rights on this subscription, it's just click create. It's very, very easily in a few hours to have fully almost all the infrastructure already provided inside your own subscription, and from there to do whatever you want. So we are talking about now about an infrastructure that can be provisioned in a few hours, versus in the past for on-premise system where you would need to wait a few weeks or a few months until all the infrastructure would be ready for you. The funny thing here is that people, for example, complain about that a machine learning cluster provisioned inside Azure usually takes a few hours. The thing that people forget that to make the same thing on-prem, I've been involved a few good months ago in such a team. Took the team around 3 weeks. So we already had the VMs, but configure all the application and all the software on top of that VM took them for 3 weeks to configure all this crazy stuff. Versus when you're in a cloud provider, everything is ready for you to be used in only a few hours. So what does any kind provider of cloud giving to us? First of all, flexibility. It's about flexibility, not about very fast provisioning that we already know, but also the flexibility to decide what kind of service, what kind of solution we want to create on top of that. So for example, you can decide that you want VMs with or without the GPU. You want machines with Windows or Linux, or even you can say, okay, I don't care to have that machine. I want directly to have a SQL instance or a non-SQL instance without having to manage all the infrastructure and all the application that is running on top of that VM. And the self-service, many times I'm saying that it's something in the middle. It's good because anybody can create his own resources, but also it is bad. And why? Because if you don't keep the subscription control to the right people, and you let everybody to be a co-contributor or a full admin on the subscription, they can do things that you can regret in the future directly, or your credit card can regret at the end of the month. But we will talk about this in a few slides. So, moving to any cloud, and why I'm saying cloud and not Azure or AWS, because most of the session is about generic cloud. Yes, I will give example related to Azure, but all the things are very important. Also, inside any other cloud provider, you have full lack of control. You don't have direct control of the resources of the data, access, security, and consumption. And this is not because you are running on top of a cloud, on top of an infrastructure that is virtualized. Is that because you are forgetting to do the same things, you are forgetting to do the same processes that you would apply if you would be on an on-prem system. The most simple question is, for a testing environment, how many of you had the full access right on the VMs where, for example, the automation test would run on an on-prem system? Almost nobody, right? Or only a few of us. But inside Azure, we have some VMs. Let give them full access to everybody. And this in the end will be transformed in money. Time is money, lack of features or lack of time is the same thing as money. So our main purpose for the next 30 minutes is to identify concerns that need to be attacked when we kick off a cloud project. Remember, there are very, very basic things that we need to think about, but we are forgetting to take them into our radar in the moment when we start a cloud project, because everything can be obtained very, very fast, and we don't care or we don't have enough time to make all these steps. First is accessibility and environment isolation. And so let's take this very simple example. In the left we have the on-prem system. In the top right we have some VMs, we have some services that are running on top of Azure. The left part, the on-prem, there are some users that are using, let's say, a VPN connection to connect to the resources, to the application that are running on top of Azure. Now, in the moment when I put that hacker face, what are you thinking about? Somebody external that would try to hack your system, right? This is something that you are generally thinking about. But many times, the head of the hacker, can be taken by somebody in the team that didn't thought or didn't, let's say, didn't had enough time to do the right configuration. And here the best example is that I had in the past a client that was based in UK. This means that for them was very important that all their systems that are running on top of Azure to be accessible only from their on-prem infrastructure. This means that they had a VPN connection between on-prem and the Microsoft Azure data center, and all the requests would need to go through that VPN connection. There was a third-party company, under ex-IT company, that what they've done, they configured the virtual network, the VPN connection, everything was fine, right? From that on, that IT company that made the configuration made a step back, and they said, okay, you have the VPN connection, everything is fine. Another company, another team, created inside Azure the VMs, the database, some web application that were run on top of app services, and made a full deployment of the production environment of their application. Until now, everything sounds good, right? The client, a non-IT company, it was more related on the business. They had 0 IT guys inside the company, thought that, okay, we are fine, we have the VPN connection, we have the web application that are running inside Azure and so on, so nobody can access our resources from public internet because we have the VPN connection. Right? Or no? That's wrong. And why? Because it is not enough to have a VPN connection between two endpoints to be sure that all the services that you are creating inside Azure or inside any cloud provider will go only through the VPN connection. You need to do some additional steps, like configure the firewall, configure some network security group rules, and so on, to be able to ensure that not all the things are also public accessible. They even didn't done a simple test without a VPN connection to see if they can access that web application or that database and so on. So these are some small flavors that are specific to cloud. But also, if we compare with an on-prem system, the same things you would do, you would configure on an on-prem system. You would configure the on-prem network to not be public accessible, maybe put it behind a firewall or a virtual appliance and so on. But all these steps we also need to think about it when we are thinking about the cloud. Now, a second thing, it is about environments. And why? Because when you have multiple environments inside cloud, the first thing that people or the managers ask about, it's about money. How much would it cost me to have test, pre-production and production environment, and maybe even more environments? And what the technical teams are trying to do, they're trying to optimize cost. What does this mean? This means that they are trying to share the same resources between different environments. A very common situation, what I seen was that, for example, the storage to be shared between dev, test, and pre-production, and it might be a good idea for dev and test, but in pre-production environment you shouldn't do that. Because on-prem system, you don't do the same thing. Because in pre-production, you might already have some client data, some client real data that you don't want to have access or to be accessed by the development team, by the support team, testing team, and so on. Subscription might or not might be shared. We'll talk a little bit about this later on. And also, access control is very common to be shared between all the environments. And what I'm referring to it is that there are usually development teams or testing team have full access to all these environments. And when I'm saying full access, they are administrator or co-contributor to that Azure subscription, even if they don't have access to that SQL database. But in the end, they have the power to reset the password or to go inside the storage and to find the keys to access the specific resources. So we need to be aware on how we are sharing this access control and how we can segregate different environments. So for the thing that we should all the time split is the access control. For each environment, we should have different access control, and it would be nice if we wouldn't share the same people would have access to multiple environments as at least admin and co-admin. Because, for example, for development environment, you can have some technical lead or somebody from development team to have access to it. For the testing environment, you will have maybe somebody from the DevOps that manage the specific environment. And from pre-production and production, that's another story. If you're working in a small company or you have a small project, testing team might have access, or they might do the deployment, or DevOps might trigger the deployment and have access. But if the project is bigger and bigger, or the size of the company is bigger, then for pre-production and production, you should have the same procedure that you have on on-prem systems that are very large. This means that none from testing and from development team has access directly or indirectly to the pre-production and production environment. Somebody else should manage these environments, because in the end we are humans. And maybe we want to take a look, take the data, put in the test environment and see if we can replicate a scenario or not. So from accessibility and environment perspective, first of all, we need to think about network and network isolation. Having a virtual network and a VPN is not enough to have our resources inside Azure close to the public internet. Almost all the services that are now available inside Azure services can have, in one way or another, rules similar to the firewall. Basically, you can filter the IPs, and for some of them, the ports from which they can be accessed. The second thing is public accessibility. And think about this. It's very important to know very well each service, to know exactly how it behaves. And here, lesson learned and an example is app services and web apps. And why? Because if you put a web app inside a virtual network, you might expect that that web app is only accessible from that virtual network, right? Or this is the initial expectation because you put it that web application to run inside the virtual network. But this is a wrong assumption. When you put a web app inside a virtual network, this means that web app will still be accessible from the public internet, but the application on all the requests that are coming from the specific virtual network will go directly to the web app without having to go outside the virtual network, finding a router or a system that manages the request and coming back to the virtual network. So this is a small flavor, but that can induce us in error. Of course, don't forget about HTTPS, and the last thing is location. And about location, I will come back a little bit later. But remember that some countries have very strict regulation. UK, Germany, and Japanese especially, and of course China. In this kind of situation, we need to ensure all the time that all the resources are in the same region and are not spread around different locations. Access rights. And here I have a question. How many of you are developers? How many remain with hands up? From you, how many have access to the Azure subscription? Okay, almost all of you. Same for PM, tester, DevOps, IT, and client. So usually everybody has access to access the subscription to do the thing that they want inside it and so on. If we would talk about an on-prem system, a developer would have normally access to the VM where an Apache or IS servers is running? Most of the cases, no. They might have the rights or might have the right configuration to be able to make a deployment of the web application or a desktop application to the specific environment. But that is all. And I'm challenging you to take this idea. Maybe you have time tonight or tomorrow to think about it. If all of these people need full access to the subscription, and why? Because most of the things are done by the DevOps nowadays. And in day-to-day work, what does, for example, a developer do when he interacts with Azure? He is doing the deployment, maybe is uploading some content and accessing resources to check if the application is running in the right way or another. They don't do any kind of changes inside to the infrastructure or to the services that are running inside Azure. And even if they are doing the changes, it's a problem of if they should do the change or the DevOps team, because in the end you need everything to be automated. Also, testers usually, beside accessing the application, they might need to be able to access the logs and some historical information and some metrics, performance counters, and so on. All this data can be configured in different repositories to be accessible by the testers, but without having to access the Azure portal as a contributor to have full access and things like that. IT of the company that is implementing the solution, they are not on the project. They should not have access to it. And the project manager, okay, you are the project manager of the project, but you are not a technical guy. You never do a deployment. You never do any kind of changes. You might want to look at the billing and consumption. Microsoft has a different portal dedicated only for this situation. So when we talk about subscription access, first of all, limit the full access rights. Think about if you're giving permission to somebody, don't forget that you have multiple roles, granular to each Azure services that you want to use, and you can provide access only to that specific service, only to that VM, or only to that SQL service, and so on. The second thing, control the access of dev and the test team, and also And this is something very common in Romania because we are in an outsourcing company. Most of the companies in IT are outsourcing company or nearshore or whatever we want to call us. But in the end, it is important that as a company that is offering services to an end customer, we should never be an admin on that subscription. And why? What is the biggest difference between admin and a co-contributor? Do you know? The admin can add or remove other users to the subscription, can add new administrator, can new user to access and so on. And the co-admin can do anything on the subscription, can create new resources, can remove resources and so on, but he cannot do one thing. He cannot add or remove existing users. And it is important in the moment when one account is compromised, at least to know to be able to expand the user that has access rights to the subscription. And also the last thing, use only company emails. Because there is a big difference between company email and personal email. The biggest difference is in the moment when you leave the company. In the moment when you leave the company, if you use the company email, there are, I would say, 99% of the chances that you have an AD account behind the scene, that usually the IT will automatically close the account in a few hours, in a few days. But once the account is closed, you will not be able to access anymore the Azure subscription that were connected to that account because the account is closed, is suspended. Versus if you use your own personal account, let's say yahoo.com, gmail.com, outlook.com, you can leave the company and nobody will remove your rights. Why? Because not the internal IT of the company are managing that access rights. That access rights are usually managed by the team, by the technical guy from the team and so on. And it's not very often that somebody from the technical guy, okay, left the company, I should remove him from access rights of the specific subscription. I didn't saw too often this kind of thing happen. And I have access to around 8 or 9 subscriptions from ex-clients or ex-partners where I still have access directly, even if I shouldn't have access to the subscription anymore. It's just about how you can control and how you can do this stuff. Third thing is about data security. We have developers, we have testers, we have DevOps, we have clients. And what is happening inside Azure, all have full access to the storage, to the relational database, to the NoSQL database, and so on. This is very, very common. We don't care. We just give access right and we are happy. We are forgetting that behind the scene, we have different environments. And at least what we can do, we can control access to different storages based on the environment type. So, as I said before, a developer should not have access to the test, to the pre-production or production environment, and so on. I know there are very, very basic things that on-prem are like golden rules. Everything respect them. You have a very clear policy, how you need to do the configuration and so on. But inside Azure and inside cloud, nobody is thinking in general about this, and nobody cares until you do a mistake. You have a security breach, or the consumption goes up very, very fast. Secondly, related to data security is country regulation. I usually have a joke here that it's so often Microsoft release a new Azure region that if you don't update this slide every 1 or 2 weeks, you might end up with an outdated slide. But what is important here, and the best way to express this is by an example that I had to manage last year, is that I had a UK customer with very, very sensitive data. I would say that the GDPR is 0 related to what kind of data he had about his clients. And we are talking about very, very special clients. Not only financial information, but also other kind of information. All the data were stored inside UK. Sounds good, sounds feasible. You are complying with all the UK laws and so on. Security of the storage was very, very good, very strict, and we were very happy. Once I started to do an audit on that solution, guess what I discovered? The crunching system that was processing the data was not in UK, was in West Europe. Pam pam. What does this mean? That data, all the data that was crunching was pushed from UK to West Europe, was processed in West Europe, and the result was coming back to UK. Even if, let's say that you have a secure tunnel between these two endpoints and so on, from a legal perspective, you are not allowed to take the data outside the country. And the mistake was that the IT company that made the configuration didn't check because they had a manual, they created manually all the resources. They were not aware exactly when they created the resource in which Azure region you are. This is why it's very important to do a fully automated deployments and create resources, because in this way you only set one time, for example, the location, and you will know that all the resources that are created will be in that location if you are using of course this parameter. Talking about data security, environment isolation is super important. There are some cases, especially in production and pre-production environment, where support team, level 2, level 3, might need to access the data to be able to replicate or to understand what is the technical issue. SQL, but also Oracle have similar features from this perspective. Oh, also, do not forget, you can also find Oracle inside Azure, not only SQL, and even SAP now is available inside Azure. So let's come back. For SQL, you have row masking and data masking. What these are allowing us to do are allowing us to hide rows for specific users that are accessing the database. So, for example, if I'm a technical guy that's offering support to a production environment, if my role inside SQL is configured in the right way, when I execute a select star from specific table, I will only see mock rows without the real production ones. Data masking is similar, but it's not on the row part, it is on the column part. So I can hide columns from specific user and roles, and to generate some random value or some specific value inside that fields. And in this way, for example, I can mask the salary and to put a salary of an employee, a random value between 10 and 10,000. And this is more enough for testing scenario or debugging cases. Also, don't forget that you don't need to give full access to specific resources. The best example here is Azure Storage. Using token-based access, shared access signature, for example, you can provide access to somebody to a resource like a file or an Azure table for a limited period of time, and only with specific rights. For example, only with write operation, or rights, or only with read rights, and so on. And also, all the Azure services are built in, or most of them now are built around role-based authentication. This means that you have already created, you can find inside Azure clear roles for each service, and you have a granular way how you can provide access to different people. Now, let's talk about resource management. How does subscription of a project look like in first day? Something like that. Somebody's creating maybe the development environment, some VMs, some storage, and so on. After a few days, team is starting to play around a little bit, creating more resources, maybe some local resources only for them, others different environments. After a few days or weeks, you don't have no idea about what you have inside that subscription. Based on the name, based on the kind of resources that you have, you don't know if it's something that is used, something that is used, that is not used. You don't have any idea about what are the resources, what are the purpose, if somebody is using them or not. Here I have a funny story. I think two or 3 years ago, and the story was on AWS. Somebody complained that in the last 6 or 9 months, their cost per month of of that account increased and remains all the time with the cost is more than 50,000 euros per month. They usually had around 6 to 7, sometimes 10, but now it's more than 10, 15,000 euros per month. They made a review of the services that they are using. They didn't find anything. Guess what was the cause? Sometime in the past, somebody created 4 or 5 powerful VMs to do some tests. They give them some names like the one similar to the one in production. Because they had the name like the one in production, nobody touched them. It was very hard for them to realize that 4 or 5 VMs that do 7, 8,000 euros per month consumption are not used by anybody. Nasol, as we say in Romanian. So when we're talking about resource management, what we should be aware of. First of all, it's environment definition. We need from day zero to define exactly how the environment looks like, what kind of resources we will have, and also different cleanup and tear down procedures and even scripts. And everything should be, I wouldn't say scripts only, let's say in an automation way. It can be script, it can be template, it can be in any way you find easily for you and for your team to have control to it, but you need a way to be able to do this. Another story related to this topic, 3 or 4 years ago, I think, or more than 4 years ago, we started a pretty big project. We had more than 20 people involved in the project itself. For an Azure project, there were plenty of people during that time period. The problem was that people were all the time creating resources, forgetting to remove them. We had a lot of times resources that we didn't even have an idea about who is using them, what is the purpose, and so on. So what we've done, and I will update a little bit with the features that are now currently available on the market. Specific environments, we started to, or specific deployments instances, we started to use the lock features. Basically, when you put a lock on a specific resource or a specific resource group, nobody can remove, for example, or delete that specific resource without removing the lock. And not all the people might have the rights to be able to remove the lock. In this way, we define exactly the environment, and only in that period of time we had a dev, but now we would call it a DevOps that would manage that environment, the deployments, and so on. Besides this, we invest in 2 different directions. One, every night around 10, 11, we had an automatically script that would run and remove all the resources without a lock. We don't care about what you have inside there. We don't care if it takes you 4 hours in the next day to be able to recreate the resource. The good part that after a few weeks, guess what the development team started to do? They started to define the scripts to automate, to make the automation of the process of creating all the resources that they need. After a while, we moved this only 1 time per week, the cleaning procedures. But in the end, we were able to have the scripts in that time, the PowerShell script that would enable us to create all the environments, even the dev environment for only one dev. Maybe you are working on a task where you need 1 SQL and 2 VMs. Only his environment will be automatically created and to be ready for use only from 1 button. And in the end, we were able to spin up around 200, 250 VMs plus SQL storage and configuration only on push of a button with complex PowerShell behind the scene. Complex, hard to maintain. Yes, this is the truth, but in the end, no custom configuration or change was made directly from Azure portal. Everything was made from the script and automatically update the deployment scripts and so on. Cost control. You said that you already have in production or maybe in different environments, different solution. And my question is here, how many of you know, when I say exactly plus minus 10%, what is the bill at the end of the month? And you can do a forecast for the next 1 or 2 years. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we've done a forecast of Azure cost for the next 10 years. Microsoft is offering you the forecast of the price, or can give you some insights for the next 3 years. For 5 years, they said impossible, but our client had to have the forecast for the next 10 years. What we've done in that case, we started to look at statistical information to see how does the price of the processor power goes, the storage, the internet price, and so on. And we done some forecasting about, okay, this would be the end cost after 10 years of running the production inside Azure. This is something that they required. This is it. But when we are talking about cost control, first thing that you need to do is to estimate first. Do the estimation before starting the project. If you cannot do the right estimation, this means that you don't know what you will have in production environment, and you don't know enough the system to be able to go in production. Define the budget. Define how much money you can spend per month or per year with your system. Be aware of the access control, because letting developers to create resources when they say that they need might be a mistake sometimes. They might create resources, might spin up some VMs or some SQL instances that they don't need, and you just spend money for a simple select star from a table that only have 2 or 3 rows, or even is empty, but still they have a very expensive SQL instance that is running for a few days. Limit consumption per environment. You can define alerts, and you have different mechanisms how you can be aware of how much you spend. And the last thing, empower the team. And this is super, super important. And with this, we will close the session. Empower the team, empower them to understand that anything that they do inside the code can have a direct impact on how much the system will cost on top of Azure. And let me give you an example. 2012, I was a developer on a project that was a classical web worker or solution with a service bus between them. Very simple solution. The queue inside the service bus was checked by the worker role that would crunch the information every 1 second or every half a second. From the performance perspective, everything was fine, but because I'm a developer, because I want to do optimization and so on, what I've done, I change it from, let's say, 1 second to 10 milliseconds. What is important to know that for a queue, for a service bus, you pay for each transaction, or that time you could not have a reliable connection that would be persisted in time. And for each transaction, you would have a small fee, 1 million transaction or a few cents. Even if you don't have a message in the queue, you would still pay for the transaction. So normally the cost would be around 400-500 euros per month. After my experiment, we ended up with around 1,200 euros per month. It's almost double, only because of such small mistake. So my time is already up. I only have a short conclusion, and this is all. Don't forget to apply the same processes, the same procedure, and the same concept that you would use on-prem inside the cloud, inside Azure. Yes, you might change something, you might need to remove something, you might need to add something, but at the end of the day, think about all the concerns that you have with an on-prem system and apply the same principles inside a cloud solution, because they are very important. They are old as the world. If we are thinking about that, most of the developers, at least in Cluj, are around 25-35 years old. So we were not born in 16 or 15 when this kind of principles started to be defined and written inside the books. So thank you very much. If you have questions.